coordination with the Committee on International Discussion and Debate of the National Communication Association, we have two visiting British debaters. Niamh Thompson, originally from Northern Ireland, is currently working in emergency medicine in Scotland. Dan Scagno, whose background lies in legal training, was the national champion of the Insurance Law Moot 2016. Niamh will be partnering with Chase Nelson, sophomore international business and management major. Dan will be partnering with Roy Cantangol, sophomore accounting business and economics major. The topic they will be debating. This House believes that there should be no restrictions on comedy. Let's begin.
Hi, I'd like to first say thanks everybody for coming and watching this debate or listening to it. And today we are discussing should be no restrictions on comedy. I'd like to start out with a joke. There's a mama tomato, a daddy tomato, and a baby tomato. They're walking down the street, right? Well, baby tomato starts falling behind. Well, daddy tomato gets angry, goes back, squashes baby tomato, and says, "Catch up." As Webster Dictionary defines, restriction is a limiting condition or measure, especially a legal one, and a comedian and entertainer whose act is designed to make an audience laugh. For my first point, I like to state it is to intent. When looking at a professional comedian, they are being paid by you to be funny. The point of the show is not to incite violence or have a hate rally of any kind. The intent isn't there. The prosecution would be looked at different because the intention could be interpreted wrong and someone innocent could go to jail. No intention of harm, but more than that, if a comedian is making a joke about offensive attitude, the problem isn't the joke, it's the attitude. The joke is only funny because the person recognizes what they're talking about. The problem isn't the joke, but what the joke identifies.
Point of information?
I'll allow it.
What happens if the joke is specifically directed to a minority group or a group in general that targets them in a negative way?
You are paying for that, and you are understanding what the comedy is about. If you try to ban the comedy, you make the bad attitudes worse, and you take away the best tool to fight them. Even though comedians don't physically touch or interact with you during a show or while on TV, they need to understand the audience and what would be fun. Politics, sports, public figures are what comedians target the most, and what as a society finds funny. Leading into my second point, what comedy gives us. A lot of unrestricted comedy allows us to make light of difficult topics and being able to move on from it. We tend to see people use comedy to move on past bad situations, so it doesn't hold us back and move on, and not allow us to be so down about it. There are times comedy hurts, but it's such a broad subject, and hurting people is considered being funny, such as roast and political propaganda. And which leads me to my third and final point of the comedian or any other personnel trying to have a comedic show. It comes at us with a different angle or perspective of where our society is. Our society is encouraged to explore all the angles and perspectives of certain issues and controversy. With comedy, it opens a broader door so we can explore the issues better.
Point of information?
I'll allow it.
Wouldn't you say that there are other ways of exploring, other aspects of exploring comedy or general life without victimizing people?
Yes, but we tend to do it a lot, especially with today's society. The whole purpose of comedy is to make us laugh no matter how crude the material is. Comedy is an art form protected by the First Amendment, and if you are especially paying for it. There should be no restrictions. Restriction comedy is a direct violation of our right to free speech. Limiting it would be unconstitutional and telling us the people what we find funny and not funny. Thank you.
All right. All right, everyone, I'd like to start off saying thank you, everybody, for giving us our time to come over here and watch us debate this quite complicated topic. I'd like to start off by saying that my opponent has brought up three significant points in which his points were that when you viewing a professional comedian, you're pretty much paying for them to make you laugh. So that he's saying that their job is to make you laugh, therefore their intent, which leads to the second point, is not to be great inciting violence or, say you should go stab your opponent or anything like that. But that leads to the third point, which means that he's trying to show that comedians give different angles to problems, i.e. controversial topics or different types of incidents in which there's usually only one main angle towards the problem. However, I'd like to bring up for our 3 points of the fact that the main problem we have with comedy is it creates a victimization of people, in which there's two types of people are minorities and the LGBTQ minority. One such minority for people is the ginger people. One good example is on an episode of South Park known as Ginger Kids that was aired years ago. They talked about pretty much the main topic of gingers. However, a few years later, it led to a creation of Kick a Ginger Day, in which that the main opponent of that main subject of that day was pretty much kick a ginger. Any ginger you find, you go kick them because it's Kick a Ginger Day, in which that was inspired by that episode from South Park. And there was actually a few incidents in which I think a group of kids went attacked a ginger at their middle school, citing that episode of South Park saying it was okay because we thought it was funny. Which then leads to the second point of LGBTQ minorities, in which that there was a Twitter poll in which they asked the question is, what would you do if your child was gay? The number one response was, is they'll beat them to death, pretty much, if they were gay. There was an incident a few years ago with Matthew Shepard. He was kidnapped at gunpoint and taken out to the countryside and pretty much tortured, beaten, and tied to a fence post and left to die, pretty much. And to their point was, hey, he's gay, he deserves it. Because of this incident, it led to the creation of the Matthew Shepard Act, in which gives protection to the minorities of the LGBT community from assault and pretty much gives the bonus power to police to investigate such incidents. Which leads to the second point. There already are existing restrictions. Yes?
Given that we have existing legislation designed to protect vulnerable groups like this, why do we need to go over and above that and take comedy out of the equation when we already have legislation to protect these people from hate crimes?
Actually, I was just getting to that point, actually, to answer your question. Yes, we already have existing restrictions. However, we should also just build on top of that because we already have restrictions on different topics. Why not just able to build on top of that basis already set? For example, jokes about, like, especially in politics, jokes about parents are okay, but children are off limits. Such example is Jonathan Che, the commentator and writer for New York Magazine, nominated Barron Trump to be a chief of staff for sarcastically comedic reasons, one of them being that he cannot be tried as an adult. Chelsea Clinton, the former first daughter, responded that told Che to please leave Barron Trump out of jokes and analysis. He's a kid and a private citizen and deserves to be left alone. There really is a generally accepted fact that you should leave kids out of critiques and jokes. So if we really do that as a national agreement, why not build on top of that and actually restrict this form of comedy a little bit further? Another point is, as I said before, there already are hate crimes developed and enacted, so why not build on top of that? Such as the Matthew Shepard Act, in which would provide increased funding to state and local authorities to prosecute a wide range of hate crimes. One's motivated by race, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. On top of that, and the Employment National Discrimination Act, which prohibits discrimination in hiring and employment on basis of sexual orientation or gender identity by employers with at least 15 employees, which then leads to my conclusion, which there really are restrictions of what you can do to other people. So why not build on top of that to restrict comedy to ensure the safety of people? We're not saying to completely restrict comedy to the very T, but at least get it so that it flows in the correct order, which nobody can be victimized.
PLI.
Yes?
Was Matthew Shepard killed because of jokes?
Yes. Anyone? Let's go. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to the main debate of this week. I'm delighted that you've come to join us. I'm grateful to Joe Biden for the series of examples he gave me about how not to debate last night, and I'm hoping to take those lessons forward and that you might see fewer of the mistakes that he made over the course of 3 hours. I think this debate is a difficult, divisive, and very contemporary one. And I think it's an important question that we're asking ourselves every day when we engage with the media around us. What constitutes offence? What constitutes a legitimate act of free speech? And what is too far? We would ask you, and as we asked our colleague on opposition just moments ago, do jokes cause hate? Do jokes cause violence? Or are jokes a reflection of the attitudes in society that we need to tackle? And are jokes really just a signalling mechanism of what we ought to be considering in the first place? We would argue that the harms to the groups they want to protect most from restricting this form of speech are much greater than what they realise, and that in fact they're going to hurt those groups should they restrict comedy in a way they haven't anticipated, and so that it is neither principally justified nor practically efficacious to try and restrict comedy. We accept the principle of restricting some forms of speech, come on ahead, some forms of speech where there is a direct and consequential cause of harm. So, for example, in libel laws, we think it's legitimate that you can't publish things you know to be untrue. But the distinction there is that when someone says something like that, they know it to be untrue, and there's a direct and significant harm to a single individual. What we're talking about here is someone who is trying to cause amusement and is not trying to cause harm, and a series of other actors and individuals can take that joke at its worst as being a confirmation of their bad views, but their decision to go out and commit an act of violence or commit an act of cruelty is their responsibility, not the responsibility of the comedian. So we think prosecuting comedians or people who make jokes is to put on them an intention and harm that was never their responsibility in the first place. Go right ahead.
Don't you think that it encouraged the point that people will invoke the harms into society? So by saying that joke, people are...
Sure. So the difficulty here is, as a consequence of my speech tonight, someone might decide that I have said something that confirms an attitude that means it's legitimate for them to go out and do something violent. That's not my intention. I'd just like to be very clear. But I can't control your interpretation. I can't get inside your mind and tell you what to think. I can only express myself clearly. And if someone decides to do something, I can't stop that action. So it's not my responsibility, it's yours. And I want to be really clear about that. So,
Point of information.
yeah, go on ahead.
So therefore, you'd like to admit there is a subjectivity bias in the viewers of your stated comedy then?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a real problem with subjective bias, but that's also part of the reason why you can't restrict comedy, right? Because even groups amongst themselves can't accept what defines victimization, what defines offense. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in my speech when I get to it, is the fact that whenever you ultimately get down to it, these groups, even amongst themselves, can't say what they would want those restrictions to be or at what point they would want those restrictions to kick in. There are many examples of internal divisions within, for example, the LGBT community about what constitutes an offensive statement and what constitutes a valuable piece of satire or joke. So how they would ever expect to implement this is really questionable in and of itself. But more specifically, how this harms these groups, right? Firstly, it also removes their First Amendment rights. So when you try and remove this right from a group that also values from being able to express it and also gets merit from being able to express it, you run the risk of limiting their ability to engage in their society in a meaningful way. But secondly, you create massive backlash at a time when these issues are more divisive and more aggressive than they have ever been before. So not only do you take away these people or limit these people's First Amendment rights, you put them in a context where they're more likely to need to use them because they're more likely to be attacked or to be the subject of attack. And we think that's not a fair burden to push on them because thirdly, there is no pushback for this at present. There is no cohesive, organised movement asking for restrictions on freedom of speech from any inalienable or vulnerable group. So to do this puts people in a difficult position they didn't ask for that they're less equipped to deal with. We think that's not fair. But moreover, what happens when you drive these groups underground, right? Say you do effectively limit free speech. All you do is give actual radical hate groups another recruiting tool. These people are already looking to use their ideology and their rhetoric about victimization to recruit vulnerable, silly young people to violent ideals. We don't want to give them that tool, and we would like you to propose the motion.
Thank you very much for all turning up as well, and as Niamh said, coming to the main and most important debate of today's age. I'd like to thank not only Otterbein but also the NCA as well for hosting this. We were very lucky to be able to go to the debate yesterday, and Niamh was even more lucky to be able to be interviewed. And I thought nothing of it. I thought, great, Niamh's being interviewed. And immediately, as soon as she was interviewed, a student next to me said, "Does that mean that she's cooler than you?" To which I responded, yes, unfortunately so. But she may be cooler than me, but she's mistaken on the motion that we should have restrictions on comedy. Not in time. Now, my colleague, Rose, pointed out the victimization as well. So I'm going to be talking about some rebuttal that Niamh made as well. And then I'll be focusing on two main points. Firstly, the public platform of comedy that encourages hate and how it's emphasized because of its public point, and how accessible it is. And secondly, the value of qualified rights and how it sort of harmonizes laws in today's age. But first, let's deal with rebuttal. So the other side said, you understand, I think the Chase stated that it's, you understand what jokes are about. Generally speaking, they're subjective. You should understand it. Is it right, as Royce pointed out, that when gingers are being beaten, that they understand what it's about? I certainly don't think so. I think it's offensive to them. I think it can cause massive harm if we deal with points like that. Rejected. Secondly, Niamh pointed out that you accept certain forms of speeches as dangerous, and it's actually kind of subjective, and it's really hard to deal with that. Even the LGBT rights don't accept that. But there's an objectivity of what is accepted as simply far too offensive, far too rude, and we need to be dealing with situations like that. The way we can deal with that is via the court system, by what is reasonably offensive, looking at the context and looking at the harm. Yes?
Can you give me an example of an uncontested statement of offence where someone has agreed completely and totally what the offence is, that it is too far, and that would be something you would ban? And I'd like you to say that in front of the cameras.
Well, that's very harsh for me to say, but what I will say in front of the cameras is that, as Roy's already pointed out, the episode on gingers that was held in South Park led to a day where gingers were being beaten as a result. That is a specific example of a joke that has gone too far. We need to be careful of that. And we can look at other areas of comedy. Comedy is very wide, and we can look at other areas of law. Rejected, because I'd like to move on to my first substantive point, which is the public platform. Again, Chase pointed out that comedy is about looking at making people laugh, alleviating tensions, and it's accessible for all. We all have it here. We can look online. We're able to see via our tablets, via our phones. It's accessible for all. It's not a private conversation. That just shows that it's and also it's funny, so it's memorable. So it encourages harm on a public platform and not just between two friends. This shows that there is a real danger, and we need to be tackling that at its very core. Not only that, but it's memorable because it's funny, and you're more likely to copy it because it's funny as well, further perpetuating the causes of comedy. Not only that, but comedy you don't critique because your tensions are lowered. You just listen to it. You hear it, and you're more likely to accept it and discard it because it's comedic. You're more likely to encourage it as well between your friends and possibly even accidentally cause harm. As a result, groups are divided, and it causes significant harm, and that's why we say, further, in fact, some comedians may even use comedy to cloak their prejudice, trying to hide by the fact it's comedic. So that points the dangers of comedy in the public platform. I'll move to my second substantive point, which is the value of qualified rights. We live in a day of progressive society. We live in a day where we can understand that we need to allow freedoms, but not at the tyranny of the individual, not allowing freedoms to be used unnecessarily. So it's harmonizing laws. So when we look at qualifying the freedom of speech, we do so in a way that is right and harmonizes the 14th Amendment, the equal protection for all under the law. It harmonizes the laws, and we say it doesn't actually change anything. We just truly recognize it as well. So in light of the public platform of comedy and the value of qualified rights in today's progressive democratic society, we encourage you to oppose the motion. Thank you very much.
Three minutes, right? All right. I'd like to thank everybody once again for coming out and watching and listening to our debate. It's a very interesting one. And first, I'd like to point out that our opponents didn't give us any definitions, so we can't understand the difference between a simple joke or hate speech, which I gave you two good definitions on the legal stance and who should be able to deliver such jokes. And I think that the judges should go in favor of the affirmative. I have gave you very good 3 points of intent and what jokes are subject to, what comedy gives us, and the importance of our rights as American citizens. And I like to point out that I have never seen the episode or South Park about beating redheads, so I don't think it is a national holiday, so I like to find that is irrelevant to this whole point. So yeah, so I like to just say that, I've given you everything needed to understand why comedy is important for us and how we can make light of bad situations and, more importantly, understand these situations. Thank you.
I'd like to begin as well thanking everybody for coming out once again out here. And I'll go off that my opponent, my colleague over here on the right, has stated that we didn't make enough of a direct example to support the regulations of comedy. However, I believe that we already stated that we have the law on our side in terms of there's already acts and different regulations created by the federal government to protect minorities. So why not extend that just a level further towards comedy, to media? Another thing is my opponent stated that intent is one of the main things that comedians have different than everybody else. The problem is with intent comes subjectivity of taking it in, because somebody may have an intent to do this, but his interpretation is different for the audience. So they say they may intend it as a joke, while some people with extremist views might take it, okay, he's preaching gospel now. So that is the main problem that our group is trying to support, in which that we already have federal regulations that eliminate intent and subjectivity. We already said and federally regulated that our laws say that you cannot discriminate, therefore, you can't discriminate, you can't target, you can't oppress, as stated by the law. So therefore, why not extend that to the comedy level? Just keep it clean, keep it simple, in which that we're not saying cut all comedy altogether. We're saying that comedy should flow in a certain way that doesn't victimize anybody, because it's already against the law to do it in corporations and employment. So why not just streamline the media so that they can go in compliance with the federal law? Because we're not asking for whole new sets of regulations. We're just asking to streamline the process and to build upon what we already have, as the ENDA and as the Matthew Shepard Act has passed already. Just streamline it. We're not asking for new regulations. We're just asking for streamlinization. That is all, and that's why I believe we should choose our side in terms of regulating comedy for the safety and the future of minorities all over America and the United Kingdom. Thank you for your time.
I'd like to thank everyone on the stage for their excellent speeches and just highlight to you again 4 separate points that I feel have either been inadequately responded to or notably not responded to at all. But first and foremost, to respond to Dan's comment. So he said in his speech that there are objective standards of offence. These exist. We can all agree when it's too far. And so I asked him, well, can you give me an example of something that's too far? Now, let's set aside the fact that I was obviously being a little unfair and trying to get him to say something completely inappropriate, but also recognise he couldn't answer the question even hypothetically. There is no objectively agreed standard of offence. There is no objectively agreed standard of what is too far. Some people think what is too far is nowhere near far enough, and you see this both within groups that are hardline advocates of free speech and people who are hardline advocates of restrictions of speech. Even amongst themselves, there are extraordinary differences in what they would consider acceptable content and not. So when you look at those two groups and you ask yourself, how is our judiciary supposed to come up with an objective, measurable standard? I would answer, they can't. We do difficult deliberations on complex questions on a regular basis, but not on something where there's no objective measure. If I go and I punch someone, there's a bruise, there's an assault, there's a fracture. We actually grade how bad assaults are and penalise people worse on the degree of physical harm caused. The problem is you can never anticipate how someone's going to take a joke. You can never know how harmful that's going to be for them. So how can you possibly reasonably restrict speech in that context? Because what is offensive to one person is not offensive to another. So the emotional hurt is not a predictable, objective outcome. The second thing I would say is that whenever they argued that it's funny and therefore more likely to be copied and more likely to be repeated and therefore profligated the offence and the harm, that's a really clever point. The problem is that it's similarly true for our side when we say using comedy to fix problems is a more effective tool for these groups. So when these people are able to make a joke that helps their case, that helps their group, that undermines the groups that are malicious and that are trying to hurt them, you also take that away under your side of the house, right? Thirdly, they talk about trying to balance equality for all. But again, they've not told us how these people's equality is impinged by impinging upon their freedom of speech. So when you take away their ability to make a joke, they've not told us how the joke itself leads to a restriction of their freedoms. Finally, I want to identify that they've given no response to the series of harms that I've identified to these groups. That when you cause backlash, when you cause an increase in tension by restricting comedy and freedom of speech in the current political climate of the US today, you put these people in a more vulnerable, more dangerous position with less tools for actually dealing with it. And you encourage people who wouldn't have been hateful, who wouldn't have actually conceived of or held harmful views, but instead only valued free speech, to begin to align themselves with those who actually do have harmful views. And worse, they have those debates in contexts and discussions where we can't moderate them, like online. So for all these reasons, I'm delighted to propose the motion.
So again, thank you all for coming here as well, and thank you for those lovely points of clash as well. I'm going to split my final conclusion into 2 main parts. The first are points of agreement, which, to be honest, I will say that the other side have proven our burden in stating that some forms of speeches should be limited. Then I'm going to deal with points of clash, mainly about the definition of the joke and how to deal with that, in which I'll emphasize on the reasonably offensive. And then I'm also going to be given a specific example to what Niamh asked for. So let's start first with points of agreement between us. Niamh specifically said at the first minute of her first speech that we accept that some forms of speeches should be limited. Does that not prove that she's accepting an objectivity of the words? I certainly think so. Now, we don't disagree with what Niamh said as well in the second minute of her second speech, that some jokes bind us. That's absolutely fine. We encourage that. But we don't encourage jokes that harm us and are offensive. And I think that's what we need to be careful, specifically in light of the harm it can cause for society. So let's move now to the points of clash. Again, I think it was emphasized by both speakers on the other side of the House that we provided no definition of what's harmful. But we have, via an objectivity, in fact, it was accepted by the second speaker, Neve. Now, Neve then said, is it too harsh for the judiciary? No, I say it's not. The judiciary constantly have to deal with whether things are reasonable. Reasonableness test is ubiquitous across the laws of this land and also the ones across the pond as well. What the judges can do is look at the context of it and consider whether it was reasonably offensive or not. It does so in libel laws. Why can it not do so? Why is it prescripted and not allowed for comedy? We say it should be. We say it's important. We say the judiciary can deal with that. Now, lastly, Neve, yes, definitely put me on the spot and tried to give me an example of someone of a time where a joke was just generally considered to be offensive. And one popped into my head. Joe Brand. Joe Brand said when Nigel Farage, a milkshake was thrown on him, she said, it shouldn't have been milkshake, it should have been acid. In light of the political context that's going around with Brexit, and in light of the dangers that politicians are faced in this incredibly emotional time, that joke could have invoked significant harm. In fact, she had to apologize as a result. So I'm saying to you that we must restrict comedy because of the victimization, the public platform, and value qualified rights in understanding that the judiciary can deal with that, and that is important in today's society. So I urge you to impose a motion. Thank you.
What an amazing debate. Thank you, debaters, for both of your sides. Now, audience, with your applause, I would like to ask, do you think there should be restrictions on comedy? Please clap. Or do you believe that there shouldn't be restrictions on comedy? All right. Well, it looks like there shouldn't be restrictions on comedy. Thank you so much for joining us here, and thank you again to our debaters.